Hello, ladies and gents, children, and members of the community. I'd like to congratulate you all for making it to day 3, round 2 of the MEM forum presentations. And I'd like to open our panel up with a quote by a man that some of you might know. His name was Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, to forget how to dig the soil, to forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves. And I really feel like this quote truly exemplifies a very common thread throughout the MEM program that we're facing as environmental managers across all of the disciplines. And that common thread is our collective disconnection with the natural world. Now, don't get me wrong, I love modern amenities, as I'm sure all of you do, and increasing urbanization and technology has indeed connected us in so many amazing ways and given us so many modern conveniences. But when we rely too heavily on these conveniences, it's very easy to turn a blind eye to the things that we consume on a daily basis. And when we turn a blind eye to the food that we consume, how we grow it, how it affects our bodies, how the waste is disposed of, then I would argue that humanity and the environment suffer dire consequences. This graph illustrates a sobering reality of an increase in what are called chronic health conditions in America. 100 years ago, not many people had chronic health conditions. Sure, you might say they died from Wolverine attacks, but that was like 10,000 years ago. But recently, more than half of Americans are dying from non-communicable diseases like obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease. Like, it goes on, right? And one of the key factors that initiates this horrible cycle is environmental factors and lifestyle factors, which all really come back to food and how it's grown and how, again, it affects society. Yet, I would argue that now is like the most exciting time to be interested in agriculture. 70% of farmland is going to change hands in the next 20 years. And as a beginning farmer myself, that's a very exciting prospect. When we start to shift our paradigm from competing with nature to partnering with nature, regenerative ag has the capacity to reverse anthropogenic climate change, restore ecosystems, revitalize communities, and fix our public health crisis. So each of our projects dials in on a certain aspect of our fractured food system, from how food's produced, to how land is transferred, to how we deal with waste in our and lack of infrastructure. And with that, I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves.
My name is Amanda Laban, and I'm a food systems activist and educator. I've worked in all areas of our food system, from farming and saving seeds to cooking in restaurants and working for food retailers. And you'll hear in my project how my career trajectory connects to the various aspects of my project.
I don't need that. My name is Cameron Poole. I work for Sodexo Dining Services up at Colorado Mountain College in Steamboat Springs. I do administration and marketing there, as well as work with our students on sustainability, food systems, food waste, food insecurity, all that good stuff. And you'll hear a little bit more about my experience with food waste in a few minutes.
Okay, so I'd like to start with this story. This is my uncle's farmhouse in rural Maine. This is where I spent every Thanksgiving of my childhood. My aunt and uncle were back to the landers, which means that they tried to do as much as they can to take care of themselves through raising their own food. They raise sheep, both for the meat and for wool, and they also grew their own vegetables. And every Thanksgiving was a wonderful celebration of really amazing food, home-cooked meals. And there are three things that I learned here, and you'll see these throughout my presentation. The first is that what it means to be connected to the land and what it means to eat from the land. The second is what life is like in a small rural community and the connections that you need in order to have a successful experience in a small community. And the last is what it means to lose the farm. This farm is no longer in our family. When my uncle did retire, no one was available to step up and take that on. My cousins lived in Montana. We all were still in college. And this place holds a lot of memories. And I'll talk about what it means to pass on the farm to the next generation in just a bit. My project is called Replanting Democracy, Colorado Initiatives Advancing Food System Independence. And this is my son, Leo. He's here in the audience. Like I said, was really fortunate growing up to have a connection to my food, and I've wanted to instill that into him. It also informs the premise of my project, which is that everyone must be fed well before others are fed better. It's a tenet of food democracy. Mark Wynn is a community food activist. He's been working in food systems policy for 40 years. He's a writer. He informed much of the work that I did. And these three themes that I touched on, healthy food access and education, community building in rural communities and in agriculture, and then land access through succession planning. They're each highlighted with the organizations that I worked with. So the first one, healthy food access and education, is highlighted through Denver Urban Gardens, whose mission it is to grow food and nourish community through a robust school garden and volunteer program. My role with Denver Urban Gardens was a school cultivator, educator. My second project was with Guidestone, Colorado, which is based in Chaffee County, central Colorado. And their mission is to grow the next generation of farmers, ranchers, and leaders to create a vibrant agricultural future. My role with them was as an organizer for their annual conference called the Agri Summit. The last organization is Colorado State University Extension. Their mission is to empower Coloradans to address important and emerging community issues through science-based research and education. And I worked with them to develop a survey on succession planning, and I implemented that survey to service providers throughout the state. So I want to start in Denver. I know you can't read all the names of the communities, but where I want to point you to is the Montbello community there. That is the neighborhood that I worked in. They have a 24% poverty rate, so 24% of the population is living below the poverty line. 90% of the kids in this community qualify for free and reduced lunch. And what Denver Urban Gardens does is steps into these communities in order to try to fill that gap in access to healthy food and access to food education. Montbello lost their only full-service grocery store in 2014, so they currently do not have a full-service grocery store. And why I bring this up is because we're going into the schools to teach these nutritional lessons, and at the same time these kids are going home and essentially being told that they don't deserve food. There's no grocery store. The lessons span a variety of nutritional topics as well as gardening topics. So we cover worm composting, we cover the impacts of drinking sugary drinks, we cover a lesson called Fun with Fiber, information about whole grains. And I want to play a clip from one of the kids in the program. The lessons are accompanied by nutritional snacks that we create during the classroom session, and the kids are involved in creating it, and then at the end of the program they also take home the recipe. And this was one of the kids' responses. last week.
I love the spinach and the salsa and the carrot and I got
I do have to say that he said that after another kid was like, I didn't like it at all. And I was like, I'm taking that clip. So Denver Urban Gardens tries to assess the impact of these programs, and they work with the University of Colorado to assess those impacts. And what they found through these pre and post surveys, both to the students and to the parents, is that 80% say that they increase their fruit and vegetable intake. 57% say that they're growing their own fruits and vegetables. And 76% feel that they're more knowledgeable about nutrition and gardening. And like I said, in a community that is, it doesn't have a grocery store and is actually dominated by liquor stores and convenience stores, this allows children the opportunity to feel like that they can participate in our food system, build confidence to make healthy food choices throughout their lives, and doesn't deny them that access to basic food. So the second part of my project, working with Guidestone, which I have to do a big shout out to Andrea Cohen, who's the executive director of Guidestone. She was really welcoming, having me come in and help organize this conference. The conference happens every year. This was the 4th annual one, and it is a full day of sessions, and then the first day or the day before the actual sessions, we did farm tours throughout Chaffee County. And then we followed that with a community meet and greet by Kate Greenberg, who is the new Commissioner of Agriculture. If you don't know her, she's actually the first woman to serve in the position, and Kate and I worked together at the National Young Farmers Coalition, and she graciously agreed to do this event, and it was a wonderful way to open up the conference. The conference itself had 115 attendees, which was record attendance. We had 20 presenters who I helped recruit from around the state. We had ag economists, we had people who are specialists in high altitude seed saving, and many others. Sheldon Rocky was our keynote speaker, and he's a 3rd generation farmer in the San Luis Valley, and he showcased some of the innovative strategies that his family has implemented both for soil health management and for creative marketing solutions. Additionally, we had a seed exchange, a farmer's market, a community open house that was free and open to the public, and we had a libations panel with local distillers and brewers. And after the conference, we initiated a survey to get feedback. There are lots of great quotes, but I thought this one was really cute. For Seeds and Thoughts, Agri-Summit is a germinal experience. Okay, so the third part of my project is succession planning, which I touched on earlier. But succession planning is the ability to transfer a farm from one generation to the next. It allows a farm legacy. It allows land to stay in productive agriculture. As many of you may or may not know, farmland, 70% of farmland right now is expected to change hands in the next 20 years. Succession planning is one of the ways to try to facilitate that transfer of land into new agricultural businesses. It encompasses all these things, such as tax law, business management, operations, wills, insurance. It's a lot of technical things. And the survey that we did was for service providers. So they're those people who are the tax lawyers, who are the estate planners, who are the land trust professionals. We wanted to gauge what they saw happening in Colorado and if it matched the national trend of losing farmland, and where we could make an impact. The intent of the survey was to determine the demand for farm and ranch succession services in Colorado, just an overall assessment, and then also to gauge that general level of knowledge and experience of service providers. I had done a training with the Colorado Farm Transition Network, which is mostly CSU ag extension agents, and we had done a lot of soft skills training on communications. And so the survey helped us collect some of the hard data around what we thought needed to be done. And one of the big aspects, and don't worry that you can't read some of it, but I'll tell you just that we found that family communications were the #1 most important factor in a good succession plan. So even though you need your tax lawyers and you need your accountants and you need all these other things, you need good family communications to get the process going. It was also what they cited as the greatest reason for failure of plans. I want to talk just for a minute about next steps. The group behind me is the staff at Guidestone, which again, they were a part of the Agri-Summit conference. They are an amazing team and did a great job putting on the conference and welcoming me in to support the conference. But to go back to Denver Urban Gardens, we are implementing a garden club at Maxwell Elementary in the coming year. And I will be a part of that. I'm planning on doing an uprooting racism training in New York through Soulfire Farm. And then with Guidestone, there's been a relationship established between Dr. Clark and the School of EV&S and Guidestone in helping get some interns at the Guidestone facilities for their farm. And I'll also hopefully continue as part of the Agri-Summit Planning Committee. And I recently took a position with Valley Food Partnership, coordinating their Western Food and Farm Forum. And then for farmland succession planning, that survey is providing a foundation for a regional survey. And the idea is that the continued gathering of information will help us target where to implement training and who to do it for. And then I also, well, I still have a minute, maybe. I want to pass around, this is a container of seeds. You're all welcome to take one. I have these because I feel that seeds are representative of our individual and collective power to make a difference in the food system. Both with the children and with farmland succession, if we have an individual role to play, if we're empowered to make decisions about how we eat, where we grow our food, how we can maintain agriculture, I think that helps us tackle just the immense problems within our food system. And so again, enjoy the seeds. And then I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Dr. Clark, my advisor, Dr. Knapp for helping me, especially in the early stages of my planning, Andrea Cohen from Guidestone, who was just an amazing person to work with throughout the summit planning. CSU Extension, there were many folks, Jeff Todd, Adrian, and others, the Haleys, all my survey participants, Denver Urban Gardens, and thank you. Amelia?
Could you talk more about the uprooting racism and why racism in the food system matters?
Sure, yeah. So a stat with food right now, food and health, as John alluded to. So in the US, 33% of this generation, like the third graders I'm working with at Maxwell, they're expected to develop diabetes. For African American and Latino children, that number increases to 50%. And that's a result of access. And so something that tends to happen, like in the Montbello neighborhood, is that people of color are in more impoverished communities and not getting, like the supermarket is not there, it's not accessible. And the uprooting racism training is done by this woman, Leah Penniman from Soulfire Farm in upstate New York. And she has a farm that she distributes food to low-income communities in the Albany area. But she's really focused on the fact that, access to healthy food is very much a race thing. And so, yeah, it's starting that conversation, communicating it, trying to find the right language to sort of tackle that issue, that food should be accessible to everyone, and then you have these diet-related illnesses that are impeding people's entire lives, and it gets so convoluted that you don't even see that really some of these basic things as access to food is impacting the long term. So Hopefully that answers your question. Scott?
Even though I hold the right. So your numbers for Doug were really high. The impact that people reported,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those are impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And what that says to me is that you're not just reaching young, but you're also reaching the parents.
Right.
Through pester power. It's typically what we call that when you get the kids to go and pester their parents. So why might that have been so successful? Do you have ideas around pester power and how you've been so successful in leveraging these kids to go home and tell the story?
And tell the story. Yeah, that's a great question. I think one is, this very hands-on nature. I love that the Denver Public Schools actually allows us in, and I don't have anybody looking over my shoulder like for food safety as I'm like chopping up these peppers. And having worked in the restaurant business, I'm like, wow, like this is great. The public school system's allowing us in, and so having that hands-on experience, I think, is huge. And it's also the program's been happening for several years, and it's a year-long program. It's not just we come in for 2 or 3 days. It's every week throughout the school year. And so they say about 150 students every year, but then they also, almost every school that Doug is involved in has a school garden as well. And I also think, this may be a little bit off, but that just like people want good food. Everybody wants to eat good food. So when you actually have access to it, you're like, wow, this is amazing. And so I think, the kids coming home and talking to their parents want the access to the food too. And usually they're just working a lot and they have to buy convenience foods. It's something that I don't know that I mentioned, but it's like my access to healthy food has been so put into perspective being a mother. And that like you're forced to do all these convenience things. So I think it's just that probably that combination of the hands-on, what the actual content is, it's food, it's good food. I think that just and that longevity of the program, I think helped a lot. So,
we have a question from the distance from John Joya.
Okay.
John, are you on?
Oh, okay.
If you were, try again. We had it muted. Oh, he has no mic. Let me ask the question. Sorry, John. I imagine farmland succession is an important topic across the country. Here in Massachusetts and throughout New England, it certainly is. What does successful succession look like to you, and what are the most significant barriers that you see to successful farmland succession?
I was glad I didn't say that during the presentation. So that piece, I can go back to that slide. Did I give you the clicker? I can go back to the slide, and I know I just have about a minute, but this one, the most important factor that everyone who was surveyed said was communication and good family communication. Yes, there's, we think about financial barriers, and that is a challenge, but this just basic communication, it's really hard when your livelihood is tied up in your house and in your family. Just to put yourself in that place for a minute, and then you're having to project out what will happen when you retire, what will happen when you die, which one of your kids is going to take over the farm. That's a lot to think about, you're running a business. And so communication starting from an early part of the planning process, I think is huge when you start the farming, make that process. Okay, I'm done.
Good to go. Hello again. My name is John McDonald. I am the Mountain Roots Food Project Community Farm Fellow. And for my MEM project, I worked to create a conceptual design for a 4,000 square foot passive solar greenhouse that will be constructed, fingers crossed, on campus in what we think will be the year 2021. The massive passive, as we're calling it, is it will showcase facilities for hands-on sustainable ag education and research. It'll provide year-round organic food production for the campus dining facilities, all while showing innovative and sustainable building methodologies. So as the Mountain Roots Farm Fellow, I've spent my last 2 years in Gunnison working to develop the pilot operations for our community farm out at Cold Harbor Ranch. And being a recent immigrant to Gunnison, I was taken by quite a bit of surprise at how long the winters actually last here. I mean, was anybody here yesterday? And unfortunately, I came to this realization in the middle of last summer when we lost all this delicious summer squash to a frost in, I think, like middle of July, because we neglected to cover it with row cover. And using things like row cover can help stave off mild frosts and extend the growing season a few weeks. But if we really want to produce year-round food here, in our context, there's no way around it except to invest in passive solar greenhouse infrastructure. I had the opportunity and the pleasure to work in my first ever passive solar greenhouse, pictured here. This was built by our friends at Build So Grow up in CV South. Build So Grow is a passive solar design, build, consulting, integration business. And they were extremely generous to allow us at Mountain Roots to use their space, for growing our seed starts and growing heat-loving crops like tomatoes and peppers, eggplants and the sort. And as I continued to work with Build So Grow, our relationship grew pretty tight, and I actually ended up hiring them as the main consultants for the Massive Passive project with Mountain Roots. Their greenhouse here it's a great example of what anybody can achieve in their own backyard on a modest budget. It's 240 square feet, uses sustainably and locally sourced materials like clay straw and low toxic mineral wool insulation, has triple wall polycarbonate glazing, and features a climate battery, which is something that we've incorporated into our design. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with passive solar design principles, I'll give you a really quick overview. Passive solar design involves designing buildings on an eastern-western axis with a southern-facing glazing surface consisting of a transmissible material that allows solar radiation to come in and warm materials with a high thermal mass. This then functions to store that energy and radiate it out throughout the rest of the night. And passive solar design has the potential to save about 75% of heating costs in cold climates. And for really sunny and cold climates like Gunnison, it is an extremely appropriate technology. So I was ravenous to find out as much as I could about passive solar design principles. I applied for a Haley Fund, and I enrolled in the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute outside of Aspen. I also enrolled in the Small Farm Academy design course. And this picture here was taken at the Central Rocky Mountain Institute in the middle of January, when it was reaching negative 20 degrees outside. But as you can see, it's a tropical oasis. The Phoenix greenhouse here has, pretty much any tropical plant you can imagine. And while I was at the class, I learned how they've designed this space to sustain and emulate this tropical environment with nothing but the waste heat from a wood-fired sauna. And I thought this was pretty sweet. Imagine sitting in a wood-fired sauna, gorging on tropical fruit all day. It's like, yeah, no wonder this guy never leaves. His name is Jerome Ozentowski. He's left a few times to speak at Western. And he wrote this book called The Forest Garden Greenhouse. And he also was one of the pioneers for what's called the climate battery, which we used in our design. So thanks to Dr. Scott's marketing class, I was able to raise over $5,000, which was used to then hire consultants to help us bring this concept to paper. We realized that we started to need to ask some very pointed questions to our stakeholders, namely, what did all of the parties want out of the Massive Passive? And we came up with 4 key objectives. Obviously, being at an academic institution, education is at the forefront of our objectives, and we ensured that it's accessible to everybody through following ADA compliancy following international building codes, and ensuring that there's enough space to accommodate large classrooms walking around in the greenhouse. Several of our stakeholders are also very interested in the research potential. So to answer to that, we have included a soil lab, as well as with the help of Rich Stromberg, we've come up with a list of what we feel are appropriate sensors that will monitor the real-time climate data inside the greenhouse, which can be used to gain some very interesting insights onto thermal performance. A very big part of my project is working with Mountain Roots Food Project and designing a partnership agreement in which Mountain Roots will provide a salaried position that will oversee the production elements of the greenhouse and also co-create curriculum with university faculty and students. And a part of this production-focused element involves designing a restricted access area. This was because we had interviewed Sodexo, and in order for them to source from us, they required that the space must be restricted access. And finally, we really tried to incorporate as much sustainable design as the university will allow, that was legal, and that also was feasible. And so we've accomplished this by using several locally sourced materials and low toxic materials whenever possible, and also some innovative technologies such as the climate battery and the ground source heat pump, which both have the potential to be powered completely off of a solar array, which thanks to Lauren Ahonen is coming up in the near future. Speaking of the future, let's go to the future now. And, this is year 2021. This concept was generated with enormous help from Build So Grow. I really suck at computer-aided design, and they've been enormously helpful with that. We've determined that the optimal location is the Kelly Quad at Western. We feel this is optimal because it offers an unobstructed southern exposure, as well as its close vicinity to Kelly Hall and Hearst Hall, which house the EMBS, the MEM, and the Natural Sciences departments, all of which will have students commuting to this greenhouse for lab sessions and educational opportunities. At 130 feet by 30 feet, it's quite a massive greenhouse. For context, that's about twice the size of the Phoenix greenhouse that was shown in a few previous slides. We've chosen the double pane glass insulation, glazing. And this is because glass offers superior thermal and light properties, as well as aesthetically, it just looks better. So we definitely designed with aesthetics in mind. You can see that the exterior finishes here exactly match those of the new facilities at Western, and that's no mistake. For our northern wall, we've chosen a clay straw mixture, which is locally sourced and offers very good thermal and moisture regulating properties. We have also chosen mineral wool insulation for like secondary walls and ceilings and those sorts, and that's also a very low toxic choice for insulation. As you may or may not know, a lot of insulation out there is highly toxic. And for our interior finishes, we're going to go with a lime-based plaster. For heating, cooling, and moisture management, as I mentioned, we're going to have a climate battery and a ground source heat pump. So zooming out, we see a little bit better vantage point of where the massive passive will likely be situated on the Kelly Quad. Now let's take a look inside. In the foreground, we have our main entryway, which consists of an airlock, and that functions to keep all the heat inside when students are coming and going for class. We have an emergency exit, of course, on the western side. And we have a washing station in the foreground, which will be used to wash and pack and process all the veggies that are grown on site, which will then be taken to a walk-in cooler, which is also in the greenhouse. You can't see it from this perspective, though. From a bird's eye, again, the entryway, the airlock, mechanical room, ADA bathroom, and the soil lab and classroom space. Now, from the western side, looking to the east, this is the classroom again. This is towards the south now. And in the foreground, we have a propagation area, germination chamber, which will be used for all of the seed starts and nursery work. I should mention that there will be a lot of hanging fixtures that are not currently represented in this illustration, such as overhead irrigation lines, light fixtures, container gardens hanging from ropes or chains or whatever. And towards the back a little bit, we see our raised bed area, which is completely ADA compliant. It offers a wheelchair height gardening opportunities, and it features a concrete slab, which the concrete slab was put there after a little bit of debate, but it was included in this part of the greenhouse for its accessibility features and ease of cleaning. And as a bonus, it also offers an extra source of thermal mass. So now we are on the we're on the eastern side looking towards the west. And in the foreground is the production area. You'll notice there's no concrete here. The Mountain Roots greenhouse manager and their team of interns, as well as food systems interns and students, will be using this space to do a more market gardening style approach to production. And that's why we've gone with the soil medium here, because you can use a lot of market gardening tools, which you couldn't be able to use in the raised beds. As you see, there's a fence that separates the education area. And again, this was put in there because of Statewide sourcing requirements. And on the northern wall, we have what are called walls of water, which you can imagine are just large tanks full of water. They offer excellent thermal mass properties and double as a source of, as a reservoir for our irrigation. So one thing I learned is you can really never over-ventilate a greenhouse. And this ventilation plan highlights the colored vents here, which will be completely automated and mechanical and will operate autonomously of any input. So you won't have to worry about how, ventilating the greenhouse every day. Below the grade, we see the climate battery manifolds protruding a little bit. And here's a cross section of the climate battery, which is it's essentially a system of pipes, fans, manifolds, and more pipes. In a nutshell, it circulates air above and below ground in opposite directions depending on the temperature to regulate the moisture and also to regulate the temperature. And a secondary source of heat for the colder months will be what's called a ground source heat pump. In a nutshell, this functions like the radiator might work in your car. Instead of cycling air, it's cycling an antifreeze and water mixture through a series of pipes, which absorbs that low-grade heat and then condenses it inside the greenhouse. If you have any questions, I'm going to direct you to our resident expert, Mr. Stromberg. Speaking of Rich, he helped me geek out with this model here. Well, he essentially did this himself, but I'm going to take credit for it. So this confusing graph, I just want you to look at the black line. So any negative values represent when the greenhouse is producing excess heat. And as you can see, that's over the summer. Any positive values represent a heat deficit. So as you would imagine, the winter months, this is when the ground source heat pump and the climate battery will kick on to provide a source of heat. Next steps. So unfortunately, I'm starting my own farming career and I can't be here forever. But a lucky student will be able to pick up where I left off. The facility master planning process is coming up next fall, and which we have an exciting prospect of pitching this to the board and getting a final review from an architect. And then obviously construction. So I'd like to huge shout out to all of our donors, Matt Ozif especially, all of our GoFundMe donors, the Haley's have been very supportive. Bill Zucrow has been a pleasure to work with. My community sponsor, Holly Khan, has been extremely supportive in nurturing my vision. It's been a pleasure to work with Dr. Clark as well as my advisor and as another visionary on this project. Rich Stromberg has been a source of inspiration and technical knowledge. And everybody else, huge shout out to you. And that's it.
Yeah, what's this
status on getting it funded? Is there any commitments thus far, and what are your thoughts on that?
It's confidential.
Ah.
No. Yeah, so no, there's, as I briefly mentioned, there's a facility master plan process.
You just have to click on
That's it. That's all right, I don't need it. The facility master planning process is thanks, I'm not an expert on this, but it's a campus-led process, which essentially outlines changes to existing facilities and new facility proposals on campus. The last one, I believe, was 2011. And in that, there was actually a proposal for a massive passive, essentially, but it never came to fruition. So we've been working with Julie Baca and Bryce Hanna with facilities to strategize on how to come up with a better pitch for the next series of endowments for the university and large contributions from private donors. First.
I just had a quick question about the automatic vents opening or closing. Is it just they have sensors for the inside and the outside, and they open when it's like overwhelmingly warm inside?
Yeah, they'll be all wired up to a unit that's connected to a thermostat, and when it's too hot, they will open just the right amount to get that temperature dialed in.
Question about the irrigation system. Is that on a circulating system, or if not, how much water would be required to have full production on an annual basis?
You caught me. That is I've yet to dive into the specifics on that system, but I have a few recommendations. But yeah, it will be. So I mentioned the walls of water are like reservoir tanks. That also helps to off-gas chlorine, which is in municipal water. I think it's in Gunnison water. There's a little bit of chlorine, so we don't want to off-gas that before watering our plants with it, because that kills soil microbiota. But yeah, it'll essentially be a circulating system, with a pump, and yeah, we can talk more later about it.
Cool.
Ethan.
Awesome project, John. Okay, big picture for you, or question, big picture question for you.
Really, Ethan with a big picture question?
So you and I have gone back and forth a few times on different ways of growing in Gunnison and producing food for people here. With a system like this, even though it's a passive solar, there's still a huge amount of infrastructure that's going into this. So is this a sustainable way to grow food in Gunnison, or a less unsustainable way?
It's less unsustainable. If we had gone sustainable, we'd probably have built a Walakini, which is essentially a sunken greenhouse based on Peruvian design, where you essentially only need sticks and maybe some plastic, and then you dig a trench. I mean, being that we're working with the university, there's going to be a lot of bells and whistles that we wouldn't really need to include if it was just someone trying to do it at their own house. So yeah. Jenny?
I just have two questions. One is, do you have to know the average cost to implement this? And then also in your plan, do you have costs to have somebody maintain it? I've worked in these before, and there's some maintenance, like just basic maintenance to keep it running.
Totally. Yeah. So as of now, since we haven't had an architect approve it because we haven't been through that facility process, we can't really generate exact figures. But basing off of square footage estimates, and I'm hesitant to give you an estimate right now, but I will, like $800,000 to $1 million potentially. Yeah, I mean, again, forget I said that because it's all conceptual, but yeah, and then as far as maintenance costs go, I'm sure that the next student could dive more into those metrics.
Got time for one more?
So the food that's grown here, is this going to only go to campus use, or are you going to have the community access to it, farmers markets?
Thank you.
Whatever?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was kind of rushing through my presentation. I forgot to mention that it's going to be for the entire community. Obviously, our closest outlet is the campus dining halls, and once we've met that demand, then there's a lot of potential for restaurant sales, CSA, farmers markets and wholesale and all that stuff. So that's the objective.
All right, thank you very much.
John, I'm gonna move your backpack, a little accident prone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Rather fitting that waste is going last, right? My name's Cameron Poole, and my project's estimating quantities and types of food waste in ROUTT County, Colorado. So the objective of this project was to collect baseline data on food waste generated in ROUTT County, which is in northwest Colorado. I worked with a local nonprofit sustainability called Yampa Valley Sustainability Council, and we did a food waste assessment quantifying how much, specifying what type, and trying to determine why food is being wasted at the residential level as well as the industrial, institutional, and commercial sectors of our county. But before I dive into the project details, I wanted to just talk a little bit about food and why it's important to me. So food connects everybody, and it has the power to bring people together. For my family, it's at the core of who we are. My husband and I both work in food service. We have a small side business that's centered around food. My husband's a professional chef, so we love inviting our friends and family over to our house for a meal, celebrate holidays, celebrate birthdays, or just to have a barbecue. It's also really important to us that our children, pictured here, also in the back, they know where their food comes from, that it's not just from a grocery store, that you can actually grow it. So we have a garden in our backyard, and we're trying to be more self-sufficient with things that we do at home. So it means baking bread, churning our own butter, making cheese, and including them in that process. They have a really cute video on churning butter. But as important as it is for us that they know where their food comes from, it's also important that they know where it goes once the gathering is over and the food ends up in the garbage can, and that's the landfill. So food waste is a growing issue in our society. It has economic, environmental, and social implications. Approximately 1/3 of all food produced for human consumption is wasted, and more food ends up in the landfill than any other single material. And once it ends up in the landfill, it starts to rot and creates methane, which is a greenhouse gas 21 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So in food, I believe, should be viewed as a valuable resource rather than a discard. If it can't be redistributed to people, it should be transformed into energy or into compost. So then why is it ending up in a landfill? One of these reasons is because some communities just don't have the infrastructure set in place to do anything with the food, to recycle it. And that's what the problem is in ROUTT County, for waste diversion in general, but also when it comes to food waste. In 2017, Colorado approved statewide diversion goals. They want to increase the diversion from the landfill by over the next 20 years. So their goal is to meet the national average of 35% by the year 2026 and to reach 45% by the year 2036, which is what exemplary states are at right now. In Colorado in 2017, we generated over 9 million tons of waste and only recycled 12% of that. So in anticipation of future legislation and in reaction to these new statewide goals, the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council facilitated a waste materials management working group. I was invited to participate as part of this working group as a stakeholder, and our goal was to create a waste diversion strategic plan for our county. We started meeting in February of 2018, and we just released that strategic plan in April of last month. It was approved by the city of Steamboat Springs as well as ROUTT County. So part of this waste diversion strategic plan, we came up with 6 priority topics, priority areas to focus on. One of those is organics recovery, with a goal to provide composting options for the largest organic waste producers, including residents and businesses. And this is based off of a 2018 study that was done on 5 counties in northwest Colorado, including ROUTT County. And they found that 30% of materials are organics that are going into ROUTT County's landfills. And the single largest material, again, is food waste, measuring at 22%. But we didn't know where and how much food waste was coming from different areas. So as part of the strategic plan, we identified 3 action steps to implement over the next 1 to 3 years. The first is to collect data on food waste. The second is to conduct a feasibility study on composting options and systems that might work for our county. And the third is to research market development for the end products of compost. And in order to support the infrastructure, support those systems once they do get put into place. So action step number 1 is to collect data on total quantities of food waste generated in Routt County, and that's where my project comes in. So to do this, we did a food waste assessment. We did it in 2 parts. We focused on the residential as well as the industrial, commercial, and institutional sectors. Our study was primarily modeled after the Natural Resource Defense Council's recent food waste study at the city level. They looked at Denver, Nashville, and New York City. So we took their study. They were nice enough to include all of their methodologies, and we adapted it for the needs of our community. So for the residential study, we recruited households from all over Routt County using various methods. We did social media, news brief posts, school newsletters, word of mouth. We posted flyers all over the place. And we recruited a total of almost 70 households that signed up. Not all of them completed the study all the way through. They were asked to do 3 things. The first was to complete 2 surveys, one before and one after the 7-day study period. The second is to complete a kitchen diary for 7 days, so they were recording their food waste over that time. And the third was bin digs. So the surveys looked at pre and post study after 7 days. We looked at household demographics, we looked at attitudes and behaviors, and we looked at composting. Part of the goals, I'll remind you, was to gauge the community's interest in composting. So this was an important part and was a little bit different than what the NRDC did in their study. Kitchen diaries look like this. We asked the participants to record the type of food, the meal that they were discarding it at, the weight, the discard location, and the reason for discard. We supplied them with a scale as well as a guidebook with instructions on how to complete these and fill these out. Also have frequently asked questions and instructions on how to use the scale. And then bin digs. So bin digs are detailed waste audits in which we took materials from the trash, we sorted it into categories, and then we weighed them. This is by far my favorite part of this project. It was the most fun. It was also the most challenging. It was challenging because we were trying to do a food waste audit in the middle of winter in the high Rocky Mountains. Not an ideal time to do waste sorts. I kid you not, every single time we had a bin dig scheduled or we were scheduled to go pick up food, it was dumping snow or it was in the negative temperatures. You can see in some of the pictures that the food is frozen. So it had some challenges as far as that goes. You also run into some really interesting things when you're looking through the garbage, some things that you would rather not run into, and some things that we'd be wondering what was going on. We opened one bag and it looked like someone had shaved their cat and put it inside their garbage, and then we had to separate the food out from that. But luckily my team all had a good sense of humor, especially my project sponsor, who also is named Cameron. She helped me a lot with these, so it was really fun. You can see my face if there was, found something interesting. So some of the key findings for the residential study, again, we were looking at composting interest. So we asked community or the resident participants why they weren't composting, and the number one reason was because there was no community composting option available. The number two reason was they were worried about insects and animals being attracted to the compost. We also looked at food waste by weight, and we found that an average total food wasted per household was 312 pounds per year. And an average total per capita, which is per person, was 99 pounds per year. We also looked at discard destinations, and so this is from the kitchen diaries, so this is recorded by the participants. 66% reported that they threw their food waste in the trash. 12% reported that they were using a home composting system, and 13% reported that they put it down the drain. So the next section was the industrial, commercial, and institutional study, and I'll refer to this as ICI. We collected the data similarly to the residential, except we only asked the participants to do one survey and allow us to do bin digs, so they didn't have to record and report the weight of their waste. We collected 1 day's worth of waste from them, and we did 16 bin digs. We had some challenges also due to seasonality in the recruitment of ICI participants. A lot of the targets of participants for these sectors that we were looking for were part of hospitality or restaurants, and in a resort town in the middle of winter, they're very, very busy, especially this year. So it was, even though they didn't have to do a whole lot to participate, a lot of people were reluctant to put that on their team during this busy time of year. But these are the sectors that we were able to represent, and these are the sectors that we would still like to represent. So because of this, we've extended the time frame of the study in order to collect more data. We want to build up the ones that we already have represented, as well as fulfill the sectors that are still needed. And in order to get an accurate estimate of food waste generation, we want to have a larger sample size. So the next step of this project is to complete that ICI study, to do a statistical analysis of data. I did a lot of the basics, but we still need to do analysis of relationships between demographics and attitudes and behaviors, as well as between the two surveys to see if there was any sort of change between those two. And then also we need to do a comparison of the ICI sectors to the residential food waste generation estimates, which is an extrapolation of data process. And finally, I would like to thank my community sponsor, Cameron Hawkins, the Director of Waste Diversion for Yampa Valley Sustainability Council. She went above and beyond what was expected, and she was with me every single step of the way. I'd also like to thank Sarah Jones, the Director of the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council, Dr. Kate Clark, my mentor, the Haley family for funding the materials for this project, Dr. Tina Evans and Dr. Nathan Stewart from Colorado Mountain College. They supported this project by allowing me use of their work study students, which is awesome. I would not have liked to do all that by myself. And the residents and facilities that volunteered to participate in the study, as well as my Colorado Mountain College work study students, Curtis, Lily, Sierra, Alex, and Alexandra. And last but not least, and most importantly, I need to thank my family who got up incredibly early this morning to drive down from Steamboat Springs to be here. They're in the back. And I need to say a special thank you to my husband. And said I wanted to do grad school, and has encouraged me every step of the way. So thank you. Rich?
Yep, so first I would like to commend you on having the acronym ICKY for digging through food. And I'm just curious as to the people, both commercial and residential, that were involved in the surveys. Have they had any response yet to the results, or did they learn anything even just from filling that out?
Yeah, and one of the things that we had to consider when considering the participants was existing biases. You know, this was a voluntary participation. So we assumed that many of the people that did participate were already aware of food waste issues or interested in learning more or really wanting to have composting show back up into our community. In some of the survey responses, people definitely did comment on the fact that they either didn't realize how much they wasted or how surprised that they were with how little they actually wasted. They haven't seen the results yet. I just finished the final version of that 110-page report. So I'm going to give that to my community sponsor, and they're going to post it on their website. We're going to email that out to all the participants so they can see the final results of what they participated in. It was really neat actually to see the positive reaction and the support that the community gave this project. I was pleasantly surprised. Yes?
In commercial areas, did you tap into grocery stores?
Yes.
I'm just curious as to, you know, how much waste they have and what the possibilities are for turning that food to useful purposes.
Well, a lot of them are actually already recovering a lot of their food. They they donated it to our local food bank, so that was really nice, and they communicated that in the survey that they filled out. We did look at grocery stores, and from the initial findings, with only including the 16 that we did, it was definitely the largest producer generator by weight for food waste. But again, we'd like to get a few more samples to get a better idea of if that's actually true or not. Yes.
Great project. I
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed hearing about it. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about the methodology. So was it the surveys or the bin digs that were informing the total number of pounds of waste per person? Or did you kind of correlate them, or how did you do that?
Well, initially, so the kitchen diaries are what we mainly looked at for weight. Initially, the idea was to do the bin digs to support what we were finding in the kitchen diaries. We made the decision to allow our participants to pick their own 7-day period, which was good on one hand because it allowed them the opportunity to pick a time frame that works best for them, which would in turn make it more likely that they would finish all the steps of the project. But on the other hand, it made it really difficult for logistics. ROUTT County, all the towns are spread out really far from each other. And we had a very small team, and we have 3 different waste haulers. So we were unable to pick up the waste right before their trash pickup that would have coincided with the 7 days they picked. So, but it was still interesting to look at and see from the bin digs in general. And the bin digs were more, I think, relevant for the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector as far as like the data collected. Ellen?
You said you had 70 participants, and I apologize if I just missed it, but how many did you have that ended up completing this
Good
program?
question. So I think it was 69 people that signed up to participate in the project. And then we had 50, I'm terrible at remembering numbers, 57 that selected time periods. We found out after the fact, of course, that some people did not receive the emails. It went to their junk mail. So like in March and April, I had people, when is the food waste study starting? So I was a little disappointed about that, even though I sent out multiple emails over and over again. We had, I think, 43 households that completed all 3 parts. And then it was more like 50 and 47 who completed one survey in the kitchen diary, but then didn't complete the last one.
Yeah, that sounds super high though.
Thank you, you guys.
You have many accolades coming online, especially from your distant student family.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we have 15 minutes for cross-cutting questions.
Really humbled to be a colleague of y'all's. It's just a huge wealth of information sitting in front of the room, so congratulations again. All of you have participated in different parts, I can't see. All of you have participated in different parts of the food system, and some of you have participated in really like every piece of it, policy, growing, selling, and buying and producing as well. Where, I guess in Colorado's local food system, where are the missing pieces? Where should people put their energies to really create a more resilient food system locally?
I'll take the first stab at that. That's a loaded question, Mr. White. I really think it's policy. When we still have incentives in the Farm Bill and I'm not an expert on the Farm Bill, by the way, so I may spat out some not 100% correct information, but when we incentivize, commodity crops and there's lobbyists for Monsanto, big government, we really can't make widespread, overarching revolution in the food system. From the top down, and that really it puts the burden of that on the smallholders and the small farmers from the ground up, who are kind of like swimming upstream against this sea of really just tough policies. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, and I would say, it's loaded. I see one thing that has come up to me is just, we have subsidies that benefit massive industrial agriculture. But why don't we have subsidies to put grocery stores in low-income neighborhoods? You know, like, because it's a business decision that the grocery stores aren't there. There's not enough affluent population. So, you know, so connected to that piece of policy is huge. But I'm, you know, part of this whole, my thought of democratic process is that food is ours, and we all as individuals have an opportunity really to participate in the food system. And I think instead of it's not like, this may sound bad, but it's like sloughing it off for other people, these massive companies, to do all the work and to, you know, passively engage in that. We all do it, it's part of our system. But I think just recognizing that food is ours and that we have the power to shift what it looks like and to put it back in the hands of people. You know, it may not be like a direct, you know, step-by-step process, but it's like, you know, we all get involved and that can help continue to shift things.
I definitely agree with everything you guys just said too. But going after low-hanging fruit, doing things like knowing about food waste and addressing those issues. And you're seeing a trend right now anyways, just knowing where your food is coming from and how it's all connected, and it's shifting as it is, but I think we all need to collectively, you know, make that conscious decision to address those things that we can and work towards the bigger issues that maybe we can't right now, but could contribute to in the future.
There's a distance question. Kathleen Anthony, she said, my question is, how has your project changed how you look at or relate to food? And if it has, how?
I guess I'll go first again. Well, I guess unfortunately, my project has made me realize all of the costs of infrastructure development. You know, being that mine is a very highly engineered passive solar greenhouse. So yeah, but it also, I think it's just strengthened my relationship with, you know, like this is an example. The massive passage is an example of a local solution to a global problem. We're not going to be building these in Florida, Southern California. You know, it's not the silver bullet. So it made me appreciate the diversity of solutions to the problem. You know, and this one just being for our local context.
Yeah, and I mean, my relationship with food is ongoing. I mean, you know, I learned things that open my eyes. I also experienced things that open my eyes. And like I said, you know, being a mother, it's like I feel the challenges every week of what it's like to try to feed my son a good meal every day. You know, that's not an easy thing. And so there's no judgment there. You know, it's definitely, and I think it's a daily process of making that choice, that food is important, that healthy food is important, and that everyone deserves access to it. And so I think it's probably put into perspective that there's like John said, no silver bullet, like you can't check off a certain number of boxes and have an answer, that it's work that will always continue.
For me, I've been working with food waste for several years now, going back to my undergraduate, but it was really eye-opening to visibly see how much waste we have. And in comparison to the NRDC study that I looked at, ROUTT County was actually less than the 3 cities that they looked at, but when you're actually looking at it on a table like this, and that was probably just, I think, 1 bag of the 8 that we collected, it's really eye-opening and makes me just want to continue to work towards reducing this impact. Like I mentioned, a lot of people think about food a lot and where it's coming from, but sometimes it's missed or forgotten or just not thought about where it goes once people are done with it.
Corey? This is kind of a question for you, Amanda. I was struck by the fact that family communication, or, you know, lack of, is one of the biggest barriers to farm succession planning. And I guess as the cross-cutting point, I think that cultural maybe difference between older generations and younger generations kind of ties across your, whether it's the infrastructure and how we build it at Western, or whether it's people who are willing to sort their waste or not. How do we kind of bridge those cultural differences between the old and the new? And I guess I'd ask you first and then see if I.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think it's happening in that there is that stark contrast between the older generation and being more like the silent generation, and then this upcoming generation where there's a lot of communication, and it forces the issue a lot more, especially with the succession planning. And it's also when there is this realization that no one is left in the family to take over the farm, that you have to do it with people outside of the family, which in some ways can be easier because then you're not dealing with sibling rivalry and different, just different components of family dynamics. And so I think it's sort of opening up that older generation to have those conversations, because it's almost safer to do it in those settings when it's not your family. And yeah, I mean, maybe I'll let others jump in with the communication.
Yeah, thanks. Totally, I agree 100% with that. And I think that's a really interesting cross-cutting question about how our culture has shifted over the last, 100 years towards farming and agriculture. Unfortunately, I feel like it's somewhat stigmatized even today. There's the stereotype of the Luddite farmer who doesn't want to go to school and just wants to work in the field and is not educated. But I would argue that a lot of the young farmers today are actually very highly educated. And unfortunately, our institutions don't really honor that on a wide scale, I guess. You see this rural brain drain as well happening. Like when I was in the Peace Corps, all the young kids in Gambia were running away. They didn't want to work on the family farm. I mean, that's like they'd rather join the tech boom, and they were trying to go to Europe, escape the droll of laboring on the farm. But it's a very complex issue.
With communication, I'm not really thinking like generational. For food waste, I'm more thinking it's an awareness issue. And just, I don't think people realize like how interconnected waste in general is. It affects so many different parts of our society, and people just don't realize it. One thing for, I guess, generational would be for older generations tend to save things and reuse them and be more conscious of their waste. Whereas I think our generation is not as conscious. I think we're starting to be again, but just a lot of those time, like self-reliant things that people just used to do all the time, like canning their food, was completely lost almost. And now I see, at least where we're at, it's coming back. Like there's more people interested in learning how to can, and there's more people that are popping up with chickens in their backyard. So it's nice to kind of see that coming back.
What role do you think intentional behavior changes play in reducing food waste across the food systems in the U.S.? And what needs to happen in terms of policies sooner than later to make this happen?
Good question. That's a hard question. Oh, policy's tough. And there are some, recent acts that have been coming out on food recovery that I think will help, directing, making it mandatory to donate food to people in need to those nonprofits that can distribute it. We have a real hunger problem in our country that this could help. It won't solve it. It's not the, the source of the problem, but it could help that. And putting policy into place that make it mandatory to reduce your food waste first, but then to follow the food recovery hierarchy, which is feeding people, feeding animals, composting or anaerobic digestion, doing those things like that and using it as a valuable resource rather than another piece of waste. It's where we need to go. That's a tough question.
Is there anything I don't know?
I guess, yeah. Like I just moved to Eugene and they don't have plastic or paper bags in the grocery store, and you have to pay 5 cents for a bag. And like small little inconveniences like that can really nudge people's behavior. And because honestly, we're not all altruists and we're not all like diehard Captain Planet people, unfortunately. But I think with small incentives, we could really make a big difference in the overall problem.
I said it great.
Where do you all see like actual food that we eat and food, like I'm thinking like recipes and distribution of like like what we eat in restaurants and our actual food that we as a culture consume? Like in your projects, where did you see that fitting in? Or maybe that's a difficult question. I'm thinking of like recipe sharing, seed sharing, actual like, instructions on how to grow your own food.
Like how to
menu
access
planning,
that,
like
or
what kind of cultural behaviors within cooking and food production. Like, where do you see that fitting with your projects? I guess it's a really complicated way to ask that question.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because I feel like the vast majority of us have lost that heritage. I'm a mutt, like I don't know what my ancestors ate, and so I'm having to like come up with my own recipes for myself. It's not like I'm not like following some family heirloom of recipes, but I think I guess for my project that would be part of the curriculum development with the classes utilizing that space, specifically with the food systems minor.
Yeah, and if you're, I don't know that I totally get the question, but if like you're talking about just sharing information about food and like that broad, I guess, level of communication and sharing, I think a huge issue is time, right? Like people are not in the home the way that they used to be to share recipes, to see what it's like to prepare a meal. And that's why, this combination of our fast-paced society and convenience foods supporting that. So that's a bigger issue. But where there is progress is just in like having the technology online to be able to access resources for, food preparation, for attending, like a lot of great nonprofits do, hands-on workshops. And so you may not have time during the week and you may be forced to do a lot of like fast food, convenience food, but on the weekend you might have a chance to spend some time learning something that then you can bring into your home. And, I think the benefit of being in a fast-paced society is that there's a proliferation of resources out there that may be easier to access, if that answers.
For my project, when I think of resources, I immediately go to what we as individuals can do to reduce our food waste. And there's a lot of things like making, checking to see what you have in your refrigerator, making a list, sticking to the list, moving food that you already have forward. There's a lot of resources and tools out there for people. There's a food waste challenge with the EPA, and I know the Yampa Valley Sustainability Council has a whole section on their website that offers tools and resources for people if they want to go on and learn how they can make an impact in their own homes.
Yeah, one more question in the back here, bold hand raiser.
So I was just wondering, all of you have done a really good job with addressing specific issues that, Colorado as a whole is struggling with, and then also each of the communities that you addressed. And I'm just wondering, one of you touched on local solutions to a global issue. And I'm wondering how you see your solutions that you've addressed and the problems that you've each specifically delved into, how we can, sort of transcend that being a local issue and how that can impact, the global issue of waste in general, not only food waste, of climate change and, building more sustainable practices, not just for where we're living, but, as a globe.
Great question.
Well, I'll start if you don't mind. The great thing about this project, it was modeled after the NRDC study, and they have supplied all of the methodology in all of their forms, and I supplied all that too with my report. And so that can be taken hopefully to other places across our country, but also across the world, and be applied in order to collect data on food waste and bring, I guess, more of that information, because there's not a lot of it right now on food waste and how much there is. But it's a great opportunity for other places to do something like this as well, and potentially spark change there.
And I think of diversity as being important in every element of our lives. So diversity in the ecosystem helps promote a better ecosystem, right? Diversity just in our educational resources helps promote, better learning. And if you're looking at local solutions and looking in small communities, you create, like, a community will get creative to solve its problems when it's forced to, and it's going to be different than the community next to them and the community across the globe. But if, like, all those in combination have an impact, I think Ben said it, it was great. I think his anecdote yesterday about putting out a forest fire with one bird, dropping a droplet of water on the forest fire, and how, people can laugh at you for doing that one little thing in your small community, and not thinking that it's going to have an impact on the rest of the globe or on this bigger issue. But it does. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's the only way that we make change is by creating these small solutions, and then they eventually they multiply over time, and then oftentimes you have to cycle back, like they'll get diluted. You come up with a great solution, it gets applied over and over again, and it gets diluted, and it's not as impactful. But you always have people coming up with new creative solutions.
Nicely said. Do we have time for me? Can I respond? Or
I would like for you to respond.
Yeah. So I really agree with what my colleagues have said, and I think, as I mentioned in the introduction, that a lot of the wicked problems that we face are the result of our disconnection with the natural world, and also kind of like handing over a lot of decision making to giant corporations, and that's totally seen in our food system. And so a lot of these global problems arise when big ag can dump hundreds of tons of pesticides into watersheds, and those costs can be externalized, and people can suffer halfway across the world while we have cheap and nutrient-depleted food in our supermarkets. But yeah, it's really all about what Amanda was talking about, and collective grassroots action, and we do need that top-down approach as well to help support the smallholders along the way, because the majority of food is grown by smallholders. We see these giant big ag farms across the Midwest, but that's all going to animal feed and ethanol and corn syrup mostly. So, anyways, that's my spiel. So.
Good. Don't clap yet. Two things. One is, anybody ever taken a class from Dr. Dave Ellerbrook in the back here? Yeah? Yes. Stand up, Dave. Dr. Ellerbrook is the new leader of the Sustainable Resilient Communities track in the MEM. That's our key panel, so a good moment to celebrate him, but we're really out here to celebrate you. I can't believe you were just in 601, Amanda.
Yeah.
You were just a 17th grader. Please join me in congratulating 3 new masters of environmental management. Well done.
Thank you.
I remember when you came to our conference and learned about our program.
I know.
Oh, is this out loud? Okay, so.